I'm Stu Jones, president and founder of the Florida Powerboat Club. I grew up in Canada, just about 4 hours that way, west around Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, in the Niagara region. I went to college, and when I finished college, I had a job lined up, and I went right into it head first. Somewhere along the line, when I was about 28 or 29 years old, I thought, is this the choice I made? I had been in the transport industry for really most of my adult life up until that time. I immediately started to look for other horizons, and the marine industry attracted me. I fell in love with boating, became passionate about boating as a young child, and as I grew up around it, I wanted to eventually be around it year-round. Of course, we had very, very short summers here in Canada and this side of the U.S. So I started looking south, started looking towards Florida, and I went down on a little recon mission. I went down for the Key West races in 1990 with a bunch of Canadian friends.
Once a sleepy port town and now a flourishing mecca for vacationers, the island of Key West continues its seafaring legacy as host of this World's Championship OPT offshore event.
This is such a traditional race that the crowd, a huge crowd, makes a habit of coming to Key West.
We hung out in Key West, and when it was time for everybody to go home back to Canada, I said, guess what, guys, I'm staying. And I went around and did some recon. I met a lot of people. I ran into a guy that was in the marine advertising business. His name's Chris Dilling. He was a very creative guy, and he and I kind of hit it off, and he offered me a job, so that's when I made my move. When I left Ontario, I went straight to Fort Lauderdale.
Obviously, or arguably, one of the best places in the world to go boating. The market is down here, and he ran with it 100%.
I had a 10-speed bike, and I literally had to ride my bicycle to work every day for about 2 months. Life was good. My first gig was working the Miami Boat Show. I quickly met a lot of the movers and shakers in the industry, which quite frankly was a lot of guys who were ex-cons who just got out of jail. I'm not necessarily the cocaine cowboys, but a lot of the guys who did time became my peers in the industry. But one of the families I met was the Pegg family, who had just built Sunny Isles Marina in North Miami Beach. And they became one of my biggest clients and my first big client. And they had a lot of stuff they wanted to do, and they really gave a lot of that to me. The first thing we did was we ran a poker run out of that marina. Then Larry Goldman got involved with me, and we started doing powerboat events and cruising events. Next thing you know, we had an agenda, we had regular events, and it was called the Sunny Isles Powerboat Club.
The only thing high-performance boaters like more than going high-performance boating is going high-performance boating in a group. That shared experience was harder to find. You had to get your own friends together. You had to, organize things yourself. Stu took that out of the hands of the people who would normally just try to figure it out themselves and made an industry out of it.
It wasn't until about a year later when we discovered that a lot of other marinas and even a lot of other builders who had found out that we were running these events, they wanted to have something similar. Sonic Powerboats called me up and said, we understand you're running these poker runs and it seems like they're working out pretty well. Can you help us with that? Absolutely. So we started doing events for them. Same thing happened with a few other marinas. So before I knew it, I was branded with one marina, and yet I had all these other manufacturing or marinas that wanted to be involved. With the blessings from my friends at Sunny Isles Marina, they allowed me to reincorporate as Florida Powerboat Club. And that happened in 1993. I had a partner at the time to help me get that started, a silent partner. I didn't know much about his business, but he had a cigarette boat and he wanted to be more involved in the powerboat scene, and he thought that would be a great partnership between the two of us, and it really was at the beginning. Turns out he was part of a big Ponzi scheme and was money laundering, and it was just kind of a bad guy for me to be hanging around. For me and for the club, it didn't have any repercussions. But we got things going, and it seems from that point on, it just kept going.
My first poker run was in 1995, and I had just such a good time. I met Stu, and he told me he ran the club, but I just didn't understand how doing this was a business. It just made no sense to me. But turns out, yeah, it was a business, and it's grown.
Stu Jones, I think about this a lot. You know, he is kind of a larger-than-life figure, and I think if he hadn't just materialized, the marine industry would have kind of had to invent him. I don't think anybody can claim responsibility for selling more boats through his activities than Stu Jones. He brought in people from everywhere, and the only thing that's done that I can think of recently is the pandemic.
What am I doing?
All right, I'm gonna exit now. All right, 3 down. At some point I realized that I had this massive playground in front of me with the club and with the boating events that we did, and we had endless opportunities to create and collect content. You can stack it up on shelves and you can have all kinds of that stuff sitting in a room, but it doesn't do you any good if you don't get it out there. The need for me to have really strong publishing relationships was important. If you really wanted to be a strong entity, if you really wanted to be recognized, you had to have media platforms. You know, long before we really had internet and social media, remember we had these things called magazines? And they had a lot of pages of color and people having fun. And anybody who keeps stacks of old magazines in their warehouse or in their library or in their back room or underneath the toilet in the man cave, you'll probably find back in the 90s, late 90s, a lot of magazines that had a lot of content from Florida Powerboat Club. When I started the TV show in '96, it started by like watching a TV show and knowing that I already was doing my own videos that went out in VHS. And then I thought to myself, how much harder is it to make this video a little better and make it a TV show? And how hard is it to find a network that'll publish that or air that? Well, okay, it's a 30-minute format we like, Stu. We charge $500 an episode, and it airs 10 times, and it has to be at the network by 5 o'clock on Wednesday to be on the Thursday. Well, that was easy. Publishing was no different. You know, I had the ability to write. I felt like the story needed to be told about the Florida boating lifestyle, and that if I told it, and if I backed it up with the real life imagery that supported that storyline, that it wouldn't be too hard of a sell to say, this is some really fun stuff to do, guys. If you're out there and you were looking for a fun lifestyle, check this out. And by the way, I'm going to include as much information about that club member as I can because he's a really cool guy and his boat is amazing. All of a sudden I found out that people love to know not just about the boats, but about the people. And for me, it was like, wow, I can really be my own advertising and marketing agency. I don't have to pay for ads. It was just one of those things where, wow, the more content I can put out there and the more ways I can put it out there, the more people come to me and say, I really have to be a part of the club. You know, it looks like a lot of fun. Once we establish ourselves as an outlet for the lifestyle, I think that's when the manufacturers started to pay attention. They started to really pay attention when the events got big. know, by the late 90s, we had some big events. You know, we had, Key West was over 100 boats every year, starting in about 96, 97. Key West has been the anchor event from day one. I would say if there's any other event that was strategic or that was momentous in terms of the recognition of the club, it would have to be anything in the Bahamas. Even though it's much smaller than Key West, it still has a very profound impact, it seems to me, on a lot of people who attend it and do it. Emerald Coast was new to us in '99. That event quickly got into a couple of hundred boats by early 2002, 2003.
When I started working with him in '02, I thought that it was like the biggest and coolest thing ever. I'm glad that I'm a part of it.
So I think the manufacturers started to see the value of their affiliation with the club because they knew that a lot of people were hanging around those circles. They knew that was their buyer.
A lot of these people bring friends, and they will, through that experience, end up purchasing a Nortec, a cigarette, a Sensation.
Of course, it wasn't limited to one kind of boat either. You know, we had cats, we had V-bottoms. Center consoles weren't really prominent yet, but they were just around the corner. Clearly there's demand and there's actual consumption. You know, people are buying boats and using the boat to the extent that, okay, they're done with that boat. That boat's disposable. I've had my fun with that boat. I need something new. And that's where the manufacturers were able to pick up on that and massage that demand and maybe to some degree even channel some of that demand in a way because they maybe built something that they thought the people would like. I would credit most of the evolution of our sport to Mercury Racing in terms of the number of engines that they could develop that were reliable.
What Stu has done, it's kind of brilliant. You know, he'll get like a sponsor like Nortec, and Nortec will have, say, 20 customers in the Key West poker room, and they're all coming down and they're looking at each other's boats. And first thing that happens is they see the guy with the 450 and they have the 390 and they go, wow, you know, I want to step up to the 450 or the 500. It's a really nice boat.
It's crazy. It's insane what's happened. I could never have imagined in my wildest dreams that it would have become what it has become. The summer poker run tour that I engage in pretty much every summer, at least with the exception of COVID, is something that I've always done. I think just the fact that you get out to travel and see other parts of the world and enjoy powerboating in a different setting, it's fantastic. Thousand Islands Charity Poker Run is an event that's been on my bucket list for about 4 or 5 years, maybe longer. This is kind of an area that I'm very comfortable in. You know, this is where I grew up, watching the freighters go up and down the St. Lawrence River. As a kid, I grew up on the Welland Ship Canal. I used to watch them go through our town every day. That kind of brings me back home. Of course, the other reason I like it here is because we have a lot of club members from this area who make this an annual pilgrimage every summer. So I get to hang out with these guys when, you know, I barely have a chance to shake their hand and say hi on my own runs when we have events. This gives me a chance to really engage on a more social level with some of the people who I'd love to spend more time with. It's been no secret, and I've vocalized this on many occasions over the last couple of years, that I plan to make some big changes at the club because I've been doing this for such a long time. I love it, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, you know, we have to move on in our lives. And that doesn't mean I'm leaving, it just means I'm gonna sign up for another chapter.
Since I've known Stu, he has been making noises about being less operational with his business, taking more time for him and Jackie and their sons to go do stuff. He loves to travel, no doubt about it.
For the most part, I want the ability to say, I'm not going to work today. I want the ability to say, yes, I'm going to go on that poker run, guys. I'm going to join you, but I'm going to be in my boat with my friends, and we're going to be just like everybody else on this run. We're going to be signed up, and we're going to tie up our boats and be a part of the event, not be managing the event. So the first operational change was to get somebody on the front lines in the office to start managing that. And that's a job that Jackie has been doing for 20 years. So essentially, we need to clone Jackie. We hired a young lady named Amy Plumstead. She's got hospitality management experience. She's very young and energetic. All of our club members are going to like her. Step 2 was to clone me.
He's got a member who's supposed to be taking over operations. He's brought in a couple of new people with the goal of not retiring, but let's say just really stepping back. Will he do it? Will he actually do it? I mean, I don't think Jackie believes it.
I don't see what else Stu would want to be doing. I hope that it happens. I hope that, he has less stress, but we have lots of fun working. So maybe one of these days it'll be true. I don't know.